Everybody. So I'd like to introduce friend and colleague, Dr. Michelle Propechka, and she is a core faculty and assessment coordinator at the University of Phoenix. She's a former AHC president, former ACA governing council representative, and current journal reviewer for the Journal of Counseling and Development, International Journal for the Advancement of Counseling, and the Journal of Humanistic Counseling. Her primary areas of research interest are life balance and application of assessment. And this is where Michelle and I share a love. We both love assessment. We're those weird people that like it. So, Michelle, thank you again so much for being here. And we are excited to hear from you. So I'll turn it over
Oh,
to you.
yeah, absolutely. It's great to meet you both and whoever pops in from here. I I will share my screen, so you know the usual, like I won't be able to like see you or easily track the chat here. Just interrupt me. I'm really low key, so I would love to hear from you. I don't make the best jokes, but feel free to laugh. I'm trying. Yeah, I'm like, if this is better than being a stand-up comedian because like you have to be here and you can't leave. And so I'm like, I have the best audience for like really bad jokes. And this whole thing is nothing but bad jokes. So let me set the stage. So yes, this is like quality quantitative research. But it's trying to poke fun at some of the things that we do, and it's like, wait, that makes zero sense. Why do we do that, and how did that get published? And not everything's bad, but it's just like, okay, but then we compare it to the exact same topic and everything, but this one's like a little bit better. It's like, oh yeah, and they're published like a year apart. I don't want to be that person. And so, you know, it's just fun. And anybody who really has something atrocious, I did not cite them and I just left it out, but I'll give the little story. So here's a presentation to go with it. So thanks for my intro. I absolutely I'm thrilled to be here. I just like this stuff. Just anything related to research and assessment is just my jam. I don't know how I stumbled across it. It just happened. But I do blend the worlds of kind of like an action research type of a thing, where being able to blend a service along with the writing. So how can we use our writing to make it come to life, to better our profession, better all of our organizations or divisions, as well as like just like the populations that we serve? That is what we are here for. But with a lot of our research, it might not seem like it. But I really try to bring it all back to that. So what I'd like to do with you today is kind of do an overall, like, what should we be expecting of ourselves for what would really be quality quantitative, right? And more to advance what we already have, as well as being a bit aspirational in nature. So kind of like the code of ethics, where yeah, we have our basics and we have what's right and what's okay, but what would be the most right? So it's going from what's a finished project and what's publishable to what would be like a little bit more awesome and like have a bigger impact in our profession. That's all. So let's do a little bit of critical thinking about your projects. Really, that's mostly where I want this to go, but I want to give some examples. So we'll dive through some of the steps of your research design and how to critically think about what's good and then what would be better each step along the way. And I'm going to infuse some of those examples, but please step up anytime. I would love to hear from you as you see something that might apply to your project. So we can stop anytime. Okay, my best quote, that is from every counselor educator from the beginning of time, everywhere. I believe that's correct APA citation there. A finished dissertation is the best dissertation. You just need to get this thing done. So even though I'm going to kick around like all these ideas and you might start swimming in your head, just know you just got to get it done. That's it. I hear so much that, okay, I'm going to do this project because it's finishable and I'm going to do something cool later. Just remember that you made that promise to yourself, because we don't always do something cool later, because the reasons why we didn't do it the first time are going to be the same reasons why we won't do it later. Like if you're like, well, I'm not really sure about IRB, or I'm not sure about how to get my participants for that, or I'm missing a clinic and, you know, it's going to take too long. I need to get tenured. I need to get more, like the quantity over quality. I get those things. I really do. So sometimes we just have to finish it. But when the majority of what I would do as an individual is just to get it done, I'm missing some of those really good quality pieces. And then if I'm just one person and I'm like a microcosm of the entire, you know, research world, then we're all doing that. And then we end up with really quirky research and journal articles, especially when we stop and we look and we do like meta-analyses of entire journals over a span of time, which I'm going to share some of those. We start to see where our gaps are. But do know, I'm not here to tell you that you need to overhaul anything. But if you take one thing away from here and you infuse it, that's it already just like lifted you up and took your project to the next level. So just remember that our research findings truly are the vehicle of knowledge to our effective clinical practice and advancements in the field. So if we're not really scratching the surface on anything, well, then we're not going to be scratching the surface very much when it comes to like the communities and the clients that we serve, our students and our supervisees, being able to help each other as supervisors and counselor educators. You're going to be my colleagues. You are going to finish. You're going to make it there. And not forgetting that advocacy piece of being able to disseminate our findings to policymakers and legislators, especially as bills like Medicare are floated around and trying to get us on it, and making sure that we stay on TRICARE and the counseling compacts. Like we really have to have a core baseline of what we do, and what we do is really quality, and be able to prove it and to have evidence-based like research and things along those lines. So it matters. So speaking of baseline, okay, think of code of ethics, right? Or it's like, okay, let's do no harm. Let's try to do some good, things along those lines. That's where I'm going to just put editor expectations for you. So whether you're publishing in JCD or anything that I've been an editor, a reviewer for, this is just a snapshot into what each of the reviewers look for. It is not anything fancy, but I also want to mention that it's not super specific. That's up to each particular reviewer and their kind of degree of expectations for everyone. We have interrelated reliability. We're pretty set in what we're all looking for. But this is just the baseline. And yes, let's make sure that we hit all of these, but maybe we could do something a little extra, right? That's going to be the theme. So we look for your abstract, your title, your literature review being timely and thorough. Of course, timely always within what your topic is related to, always kind of in context. Is your research question clear? Some of us look for, did you have a research question, or did you have your null, your alternative, or your alternative directional? You know, everybody's different. Some people will tell you to add it. Other people will tell you to remove it. Whatever, just want it to be clear, and just knowing that you're going to make changes throughout. You want your methodology to actually answer your research question. Pretty simple, but it's kind of unique how sometimes that doesn't happen. And did you have like quality methodology, like where you really sat down and put effort into maybe your sampling methods, recruitment, you thought about diversity, you thought about how to be inclusive, elements like that is like really what we're looking for more and more, which is sad that we're only doing it now, but we truly need it. Accurate results, and we know you have accurate results when you talk about things like model assumptions, and that all of those were met, nothing was violated, and that you share the full results with us, like just not statistical significance, but also practical significance, maybe some confidence intervals, things that are just related to the analysis that you ran, clearly readable charts, you know, just elements like this. One thing that I would I would love to see added to these charts is, yes, we have implications for research and maybe for clinicians or educators, whatever the population is for. But if we could start seeing some implications for advocacy and legislative efforts, that would be really awesome. And just so when we go to Capitol Hill, or we get in our head that we will go to Capitol Hill, we will advocate, and we're going to use this in some type of way, that'd be nice to have. But here's our baseline of what we want to make sure that we're doing. But let's challenge ourselves. Yay, yay, yay. So it starts with our topic selection. You're all well past this, or maybe you're at the start and you're digging through trying to find out like what your love is or your passion, or maybe a middle ground between passion and finished project. I get that too. So as we're looking through the literature, one thing I would like to just give you a nudge. Maybe we don't write about ourselves. Just maybe. I would like to plant that seed to grow for the future. So this is a meta-analysis that was done by a big group. This is back in the day. It's 2010. And what they did is they looked at the ACEs journal, Counselor Education and Supervision. And they were just looking at what type of journal articles are out there and who are participants and across time, and just what have we been looking at? What overall has the editor accepted and published and put into the entire journal? And we don't have these for each of the journals. It's not something that we have. JCD doesn't have one. We don't have an updated one from the ACEs group. They tend to do it about every 20 years. So we're kind of about close-ish. They do it 10 to 20 years. Like, what year is it? So this is what they ended up finding, is that across the span of years, we started talking more and more about us. So instead of talking about current issues and professional development that would be related to maybe how to advance the field forward and how to resolve some issues that are maybe internally within our particular profession, we moved away from those and we started talking a whole lot about counselor prep. But they're not necessarily outcomes based. There's a lot of best practices. There's descriptive write-ups that might have some stats to it, just not theoretical or position pieces or anything like that. But you can see across the time, you can see of everything that was published, that's the N, and then the percent of just of the piece of the pie during that time period, like what was the percentage that went to these different things. And we just see that a steady increase towards counselor prep and a real big decline and maybe some of those issues that might really move our profession forward. And then if you look over to the other chart that they had here, these are wonderful, by the way, and they're great examples because they completely stand on their own. Great examples. What we see here is like, who is participating? And maybe the folks that would benefit from our research or from what we do just as counselor educators, of being able to help supervisors and give them tips and tools. And the same thing with our students and anyone that we would serve, like related to administrators. It slowly drifted away from some categories and more to others. And so a lot of those who are participating were students. And that's still great. I mean, when we think about this is the ACEs journal, of course, it's all about counselor education and supervision. We should be looking at students. We should be doing that. Absolutely. But remember, our profession and being leaders in the field, and sometimes being the core authors in many of the journals across the board, because we are the ones who are on tenure track and we are the ones who are publishing, we can still make sure that we're looking at like, well, how can we impact our communities and the populations in need that are around us? And maybe we can look at some uncharted territory, such as, okay, well, let's do some deeper dives into best practices related to, teaching, and let's describe that and let's get some feedback from students. But maybe we can also integrate a little bit into maybe feedback from clients and putting all that together. We have tons of instruments and models that can look at the relationship between the the supervisors, supervisees, and then also clients, and then forward and backwards for a 360-degree view. But we just tend to not do that. But it would be awesome if we did. So my thought for you is go from the existing literature and think forward. Of course, well, how can we move it forward? But also think in the future. What would you like to publish? What type of impact would you like to have on the profession? And then work it backwards and kind of meet in the middle whenever you're creating your research question. That can help keep us all moving forward. Yes, okay, I totally get it that your entire project is going to come from the question that you put together. It's going to be a domino effect. So whenever I'm at conferences and there's a really moving presentation on a new piece of research, there'll always be somebody in the crowd that raises their hand and they'll say something like, well, have you thought of this other thing? And usually the comeback answer is, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's a really good idea, but that was outside the scope of my project. I get it. And sometimes we roll our eyes and we're just like, oh, this person's talking just to talk, or like, please don't ask me a question about something that I don't know. And that always happens. But I started to appreciate those people, I guess because maybe at some point I became one of them, but I know to stay silent. I will not do that to you in your presentation. But what had us not think of that? What had us not expand out or include something related to diversity or something just like a little bit more? So what I wanted to pose to you is that whenever you create your research question, think about it first. Is this your comfort zone? Like, is this for you? And a little piece of this, you're going to say yes, and that's honest, and that's totally fine. And like, I get it. And so are my projects too. But are you are you asking a question that's in the comfort zone of a method that you know, an instrument that you're familiar with, a population that you know you can kind of like get your hands on, and you're able to actually get them to participate? And that goes with sampling and recruitment. And are you doing an analysis that you remember from your like quantitative stats classes, and that was the one that you understood and that you got? And so that's the one that you're going to want to do. And because we can do things like we can avoid some, like, I don't want to even call them more complicated. They're just different, just things that aren't inside of our comfort zone, and asking bigger questions. And like, let's tinker with the question. Can we add something to it for mediating and moderating variables when it comes to like regression, right? Like the one, like our moderating variables of, does this have the interaction like increase, decrease, change around a bit, and our mediating variables that like without that variable wouldn't happen at all, you know? Like we're keeping those out, but why? Maybe there's somewhere along the lines is that we only know what we know. Does that make sense? Or we usually hear it the flip. We don't know what we don't know. And so we'll only ask the questions that we've been kind of exposed to in terms of what we've read in the literature and also what we've been taught. So I just want to challenge you to pause with your question and maybe see if there's a way that you could develop it a little bit further, and where you can grow as a researcher, and then the rest of us will benefit from what you end up disseminating. So stretch yourself a little bit. I put on here another element that you could consider while you're kicking around your project before you even start, is considering the impact factor ratings for your publication. Okay, that's controversial. Not everybody really loves the use of impact factors. And in today's digital times with our publishers of our journals, that they can look at how many clicks or how many downloads, how many people have shared this, how many, and then we can see how many people have also cited that. And okay, you might have a very niche area, and so that doesn't mean that everyone's going to go towards yours, right? And that's fine. But it's one of those of just how quality, at least in your mind, is it going to be? So let's think about getting outside of our comfort zones related to our methods. And I'm going to tell on us first. So this is going back to the same research that was on the ACES journal. And we can see here across time that some of our favorites to do are descriptive studies. it's just something that we tend to do. The quasi-experimental, for some reason back in the 80s, we were doing way more of these. And the cluster of these, when I was just like clicking around trying to get familiar with like, well, what were we publishing? And these were quasi-experimental that was related to supervision between, supervisor, supervisee, that also pulled in the clients. We were doing things related to looking at different models of teaching and getting to compare those and really having like outcomes-based study of like, how do we know it really works when we're in the classroom and things along those lines. You can see that those kind of went away. And what became kind of the hit recently are the descriptive and correlational. We see a lot of correlational studies, and that's awesome. We got to know the relationships between things, because not everything is causational, especially not in this world. There's way too many factors, or not just the world now, just the world in general. We can't necessarily say that this is going to lead to that. Just like the really popular article that we tend to read right when we come into the profession, that's like, well, what works in counseling? And it's like a pie chart that adds up to more than 100%. And it's like, is it our theory? Is it our intervention? Is it how we take notes and how we write it up? Or is it about things that we can't control, like time and just other things happening in a client's life, and how we all came down to, it's all about the relationship, right? And so that's like the big thing. But it's still, sometimes we can still look at things and we can say, we can do this a better way, and let's look at it and let's try to prove it. So I've got a neat example for you in two different, it's the same topic, but two different approaches. So there was one author who published in 2018. I'm not sure how to say this person's name correctly. I'm sensitive to that. I think it's Pertizzi. So this person was looking at descriptively best practices in attending to racial trauma and clinical supervision in order to enhance outcomes for between the supervisor and supervisee, and hoping to trickle down into clients. That's great. I really appreciate best practices. Best practices can be where we start. I get it. But then another group in a little earlier already did a quasi-experimental outcomes where they did an actual training on implicit bias. And they were looking at, can we actually deal with our traumas and deal with our bias, and can we actually do something to move the needle to make it better? And can we say that this particular training will do that? And when you think about this, like, which one would you want to read? And which one would be more helpful for you, And so when we think about our methods, are we doing what's easy and what comes to us and what we've been exposed to? Again, we would have to dig to see some of the more other, I don't want to say advanced, it's just the other models. We got to really dig and use those as role models. I'm not clicking. Oops. Sorry.
Feeling excited because that's mine. The quasi-experimental with the training. That's what I've chosen.
Yay!
So I had no idea it was good.
It's absolutely good. Thank you. Like, I could totally have seen, you and Dr. Stretch were talking about like why do you write so much and what's going on? I could totally get it. If you wanted to write up something about your training, or heck, if you want to turn it into a book and you want to sell it and you want to do something like that, but then if you can turn around and you can say, and I have empirical evidence that this works, now go sell that thing, right? And then you can do it in pieces and chunks, and that we could Google hopefully no one's using just Google Scholar, but we can put your last name in the database, and we can pull up everything that you've done, and we can see how you've built your sector across time. That's so awesome. So there's no reason to have to just sit and wait. I'm not totally bashing on anything, but I'm absolutely saying there's more and more that we could do. And it's such a better takeaway.
Oh, exciting. Dr. Banfini's been so excited too. And I was trying to figure out, wrap my head around how this could blossom. Just,
yes.
Being a student, not really knowing how the whole system might work.
Yeah, and like the tweaks, and it's like a one-hit wonder from a 360-degree perspective. And then change your setting. Who else haven't you reached out to? What else could be done? How can you further like validate what you're doing? And also across time, as things change, how can you update it? That's why things always have another edition. And so that what you're doing right here could be a lifetime project that could really benefit all of your colleagues.
Well, I'm excited about that. I'm kind of curious though, if I planned for a 60-minute training, and when Dr. Stretch or Dr. LA was talking about, presenting at conferences, I wonder if that's long enough, because you can't cover a whole lot. Like to do a college and career readiness training in only 60 minutes might not be enough, but I also don't want my subjects to have to give up so much time that they won't commit to participating.
Yeah, I get you. But that's not that much time to be able to grow and develop that you're really asking people to do. And there's so many, that's where like you can get really creative with your recruitment styles, where maybe you go bigger. Professional development has to happen. I'm not totally sure on your topic, but professional development has to happen when we're counselor educators, when we're supervisors, and when we're and like K through 12, like school counselors. I'm even thinking of them. Go to the districts, go to the universities. How big can you go? And then have them bring your project in. And I'm not really hating over an hour and a half CEU if you can turn it into a CEU, get NBCC certified or something like that. And then you have this exchange that here is this training, you're going to get CEUs for it, and in return, I'm going to get feedback from you, which is something that we need for NBCC credits anyways, like feedback, but yours is just going to be pointed. And then if someone wants to continue to participate and however you can move from there, yeah, think big. Like it could really be worthwhile. And then all of a sudden, like you're an expert in the field and people are paying you to come in and do consultations and do presentations and trainings, and people spend all afternoon doing this stuff.
Right. So do you think, we were kind of contemplating whether trying to offer CEUs would be a conflict for the IRB? Like that would be too much of an incentive for a dissertation project? Is that maybe more?
You never know till you ask. Get familiar with your IRB, because there is an element to, I could see a con that'd be like, you don't, unless you finish it, you don't get the CEU. And so there can be that pressure that I have to finish this, even if I want to drop out and I don't want to continue it anymore. I can see that for sure. But I do see it on the pro side that in order to recruit people, well, instead of putting them in a pot and possibly exposing their names or having some bias or something within your data process to give them like a $5 Starbucks gift card or a $20 one, that they get a CEU, like I could see it either way, but sometimes it could be maybe there's just a tweak that your particular IRB would want you to do and they'll green light it. And maybe they'll just say no. Okay, that's fine. Whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, don't be afraid of the no's. But maybe there's an example out there that exists within your institution where somebody's done something like that. And so that's where like the networking and asking around can really come in handy, because there's got to be somebody that's done it before somehow.
It looks like Dr. Stretch put a comment in the chat that other doc students have offered CEUs.
Oh, there you go.
Every
place is a little
I was
different.
thinking that would be a nice incentive, but I'm also now wondering if a 60-minute training will be sufficient. Maybe I'll finish developing it and then see if I can actually deliver meaningful content.
See where it's at. Right.
And that's why also a pilot test, right? Sorry to jump in on this, Michelle, but like you're going to have to pilot your training anyway. So you either have to do a Delphi or a pilot, and you'll get some feedback on that, so that you get that feedback prior to actually running it with your full research. So that's part of the process.
How many people do you have to pilot it with? Is there a certain number or just some?
That's a question for G-Power and other resources available.
Okay. Well, you're my methodologist, so you can tell me once you read it.
You know, other pilots have been published too. So if you want to use that as a search term, and looking at specific maybe other trainings or other keyword curriculums, things along those lines, because I know plenty of folks will even take a shot at whatever their pilot is, because sometimes they start with a pilot and they actually don't continue it forward. And that's a bummer. And so that's the part that'll get published. So take a look at some of those for examples too. Cool.
Yeah. I didn't mean to hijack your presentation. Sorry about that.
No,
I got excited.
Awesome. Well, while you're doing this, think about your instrumentation. Okay. And are you using what you know, or is there something better? So here's an example of an actual phrase. I'm going to use the psychometric assessment because this is the one that, like, this is always the way that we did it. Like, historically, this is what we've done. I'm not going to question it, and so this is what I'm going to roll with. My dissertation and one of my first publications in the batch, I used a 5-factor wellness inventory, because what do you use for wellness? And so this was back in the O's when I was working on it, and that's the only instrument we had. And I was just tinkering around in the search engine yesterday, and I was just like, how many publications have actually come out in the last 10 years that use this instrument? And it was 100 of these things. But the instrument creator herself, the late and great Jane Myers, she wrote an article that said that she looked at the data, and yes, there's psychometric issues with her instrument. There's validity issues, and also with the core model within it, but we see it everywhere. But we don't see that one publication, and that one publication didn't have enough voice and oomph to be able to get us to start using something else. And so there's something that's a very good equivalent that's out there, but we're not going to read this one in a lot of our textbooks. We're not going to see this one as much, but it's the JBLI, and it takes a lot of the same constructs, but this one has an empirical theoretical basis, and the psychometrics are spot on, and there's constantly doing work with norming the instrument and continuing to curate it and all types of things. But there's 8 publications on that one. So if somebody was interested in wellness and they did a little dive and they're like, well, I see this one article where they're like, oh, there's some concerns about it. And actually it's in a lot of articles, if you read the discussion, and it's like, well, this is what we always use, so I'm going to use it. No, use something different, please. So we don't keep making the same mistakes. The next one is we don't know, right? We always hear about the Beck's depression inventory. We hear about Beck's hopelessness scale, and that hopelessness is has a higher correlation to suicidality than depression does. And then Beck also has a suicidal ideation scale. Lots of publications with that one. However, we also know that there's only certain groups that this has been normed with, and it's not always a good fit for everybody, especially not children. And there's some diversity aspects to it. So, there's other scales out there, everybody, right? Can we please use other ones? And so something that's just a better fit for your population. Definitely not saying, hey, don't use something that we've known as like really our staple, but if it's a staple, but there's a mix match, keep on looking and you're going to come up with it. And so my example is, I used the 5-factor wellness inventory back in the day, and we're doing the exact same project. We're just doing a replication study, but we're switching out the instrument for the JBLI and so we can actually look at it. And we were looking at the wellness of counselor education and supervision doc students, which was an idea that came to mind just from being around my doc student, my peers, and we would complain over who had it worse. And so I did a project on maybe I can figure out who has it worse. But the psychometrics were off on the instrument, so a little bit inconclusive. So we're just going to redo the study again. So if I was to look at these two, And if I'm searching by a known name of wellness, I'm going to pull up my old one. But in the discussion, I pretty much say, this isn't the greatest. There's not too much we can decipher from this. I mean, we got to be cautious. But then when I do this next, when we finally get this next one out there, I don't know if we get as many hits because I use a different instrument, but it is higher quality. As you look at your population sampling and recruitment, I can look at these all together. Now, this article that I pulled is from JCD. And what they were looking at is, if you're a member of CESNET, you might see a whole lot of please participate in my research projects. And there's a whole lot of online recruitment. And even on CESNET, there was like arguments and debates over whether those should be there. And when people get to their 4th round and they're like, please participate, I only need 3 more people. And we're like, did you really have that approved with IRB to have that many rounds? Like, and was that wording approved by your committee? Please help me. I'm really thinking that wasn't supposed to be in your subject line. And so what I love what this table does is it kind of looked at 207 studies that were all looking at online recruitment. The main areas, so there's all of the articles, and then did they report on the response rate, and then of like how many did you blast it out to, and then how many like kind of responded. Some of those we can pinpoint accurately, but others we can't if we don't know how many people are on the listserv, yada yada. Sometimes that's kind of hard. If we have a set email list that I had 1,000 people, and then that's more grounded, right? That one I get. So when we look at these of like, what was their sample size? What was the average response rate? That's fine. But the thing that I was really interested in is like, who's actually participating in these? And we can see a lot of this is a great way to reach out to our K-12 students, undergraduate students, pretty much anybody who's in the university realm, where we can actually pull a batch of their emails and blast it out to them. And they're also in a setting where they are checking emails and they are following up on assignments and things like that. And they're more likely to participate just in that setting. But look how we start to kind of die off when we are looking at particular members of associations. Like, who actually gets involved? Like, our school counselors do, but again, they're in the school setting. Even we're counselor educators, we're guilty for not being super involved. We're just not. But let's look at that bottom half, who would be more of like our clients, families and couples and parents, adults. They just happen to pick the LGBTQ plus community because that was something that was kind of like hitting as a theme and being reoccurring. That we're not reaching those folks. So if we're not doing projects related to them, maybe email blast is not the way to go. Online recruitment might not be the thing, which we already know. Like, we know that there's generalizability issues. We know that we might not hit the people who are underrepresented. We learned a lot about that from COVID, and it had a big impact where it's like all this online learning, and it was like, well, I don't even have internet. There is not a computer in the home, and the school started to address that, so it got a lot more light. But we got to remember that when it comes to like our projects. And so, who do we want to reach? And what's the best way to reach them? And maybe not doing something that becomes easy to us, such as like a quick email blast. It kind of started to take over and might not have been the best fit. And to take one from Dr. Stretch, please do not skip your a priori power analysis. Know what your target number is and what it's supposed to be, so that you just have a correct power within your project. Okay, now comfort zones according to our statistical analysis. So I think a past slide kind of tipped us off that if we were doing methodology that's related to descriptive and correlational, well, then that's going to be our analyses, right? Of course. So that was the theme. We're doing a lot of descriptive and a lot of correlational. I kind of feel like maybe there's something to like whenever we teach things that we get through t-test, and everyone gets t-tests, but then you get told that a t-test isn't complicated enough, so do more. And then we get into ANOVAs and people are like, I kind of get comparing a couple groups, I kind of don't. And then we'll stop there, and then we jump into just bivariate, like two variable correlations, and everyone's like, okay, I got that one. And then we'll do multiple regressions, and we're like, okay, but then we don't get into ordinal regressions, regressions, and there's so many different ones that we stop learning about those, and we don't learn about mediating, moderating variables, and there's only so much time, right? And so I think there's something where when we're not exposed to it, we're not comfortable, then we won't run the analysis. And then that goes all the way back to the start of the presentation, that we won't ask those other research questions because we don't have the vision to how to see it through. So like, I really appreciate you hopping in and being able to share some with us. Is it Patricia? Do you go by Patricia? Because
Patricia or Patty.
Or Patty. Okay. Because I get it. I'm thrilled that you're like, I've got an idea, but I'm going to start on it. I'm going to stick with it, but I'm not totally sure how this is going to work. Great, because you're not limiting yourself. We can always learn something along the way, and it's okay. So I have a great example for you. So these are back in the day ones, but I'm really passionate about them, so I thought that was more important. So picture it, 2008, the previous housing crash, but whatever, we're not in a crash, whatever people are saying today. Housing conundrum. Okay, and so I was in my doc program at Texas A&M University Commerce, and down the street, way down the street at the University of North Texas was University of North Texas. Okay, so there were two doc students who were like a year ahead of me, and where they were at the different institutions. And at that time, we were kind of neck and neck over who was the sand tray experts and who was the best program for that. And so there was D. Ray, Dr. Ray, and Steve Armstrong, Dr. Armstrong on both corners, right? They both had their favorite doc students, and they both ran a 10-week sand tray group for adolescent girls. They both were funded by the Association for Specialists in Group Work. Like, we're neck and neck. But the questions that they asked and the methods that they did were different, right? So the University of North Texas team, what they did over there is they did a pre-test and a post-test, and they did have a control group because they had people on the wait list in their clinic. And so they ran separate multiple like ANOVAs looking at pre-test and post-test. They also had the control group there, and they kind of kept everything neat and clean and kind of separate with the dependent variables. So they had two different dependent variables they were looking at, and so instead of putting them all together and running like a ANOVA or doing something like that, they didn't. They just, I stated this as a separate research question, and so that's what I'm going to do. Might have been some sample size issues to be able to run that, but that's what they did. So now back on my side of the state of Texas, what they did over there, well, you have your treatment group and you have your control group, because we ethically have to give the treatment to the control group. We just have to. So the one thing that my colleague at my university did, she just decided, well, let's continue to follow that treatment group. Like, they went first. Let's just check in with them 10 weeks later after the control group is done, and let's follow up with them and see if the outcomes actually kind of stuck for an additional 10 weeks. And that's all she did. And then she put it together, and because she had a small sample size and, being able to control for those things and meeting the model assumptions, like, she ran a SPANOVA. I will tell you, we did not learn this in class. I was in these classes with her. I was like, you're gonna do what? What is this? But we learned right alongside her as she was looking stuff up and as she was analyzing it. And we just sat around with like our faculty members and we learned from them. And sometimes I think we were learning at the exact same time of how do you do this? And so one was published in 2007 they were both published in the exact same journal. One was 2007, one was 2008. And I'm like, wow, well, which one would I read? Well, I'm going to read the other one that's got more details to it, you know? So my main message here is get out of your comfort zone and do something cool. Even when you have no idea what it is and you're legit watching a YouTube tutorial and you're clicking as they click when you're running it. That feels like a weird place to be at the very end of your program, and like that's what you're doing with your dissertation, but it's okay. You're probably going to be watching a tutorial anyways on something else that you remember learning, and you're going to go back to your notes because we double check stuff. It's always okay to look it up. We don't have to memorize it and know. And if you sat and quiz me right now, no, I'm not. You click here in SPSS, and now you magically, no, I have to look it up. And I wrote it down, and I have a cheat sheet for the stuff that I consistently do. You know, that's what we all do. When I take the magic behind the Wizard of Oz of like statistical processes here, it's not that neat. It's on a sticky note. So think big, think awesome. There's always ways to figure it out, and just believe in yourself. That's all. And okay, and just to wrap up, so we went through this whole thing of like just being creative and being innovative. Now there are some checklist things that like aren't that cool to talk about, but I want to make sure that I didn't forget. When you're all said and done and everything's beautiful and you're ready to submit your article, please go back to this checklist or something along those lines, and make sure that you've actually written out what your null, alternative, and alternative directional are. It's easier to hit delete than it is to go back and add it. This should be easy, but it's most likely going to be best practices in your dissertation because we kind of overly write and we cover everything in our dissertations. And you know, we cut stuff down when it comes to our manuscripts, but throw it in there. And if an editor asks you to take it out, it's easier. Please explain the meaning of your assessment scores and the interpretation, because I'm going to tell you that the reader isn't going to know what it is. Like what's high, what's middle, what's low, what do all those things mean, so that we can understand the basics of what the assessment was and what the descriptive statistics are, so we can understand the bigger ones. Because that's great, you can do something flashy, but if you lost your reader early on, they're not following you through the end. And then that's where a lot of our like master's level folks, they'll skip the results section. I understand that. And then they'll go from abstract to discussion. But if we can carry them step by step, they're more likely to read the rest of it. And they can if we can just break it down. Please address those model assumptions and make sure you're throwing in power in there. My little nudge / education here, there is a movement towards saying P is equal to, greater than, or less than the alpha level that you set, that you pre-chose, and that instead of saying P is equal to 0.045 and you're trying to, no, just say that it's like less than 0.05. Like, what are we doing here? You're not showing that this is more statistically significant, or if it's 0.051 and it's just a little bit over, you can't say, well, it was close to being statistically significant. This stuff is black and white. It either is or it isn't. And the phrases such as approaching significance. Okay, I'm a little bit of a smart butt, and I'll say, how do you know that it wasn't running away? Maybe it was leaving significance and it doesn't like it. Like, you don't know what it was doing. We just don't overstate it. Make sure your tables are clear. That's always awesome. You'll definitely get feedback if something's wrong with your tables. You might as well address it before you turn it in. Please remember your practical significance and your confidence intervals. I think I mentioned that a little earlier on. Just a reminder. And be humble and conservative. And I did mention that there was one particular article, or there was an article, and I won't say who it was. We actually read these things and other people will read it. So there was a 10-week group counseling session with older adults, and there was a little word in there that was not fitting: cures loneliness. Does it? Are you serious? Is that what you meant? Did you get, like, were you tired? Did you not realize that you said it? So that one doesn't have a citation, but that one's one of my favorites because I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So just reread things and make sure your narrative actually holds up. So